thing. We have a thing in Ohio, though, that we see on the Weather Channel, the news every now and then when the weather comes up, usually in the winter, and it's called an Alberta Clipper. So, y'all just keep it, okay? Because it's never a really good thing. It's cold, but we're very similar to Ohio. It's like if you don't like the weather, wait 20 minutes because it'll be something else. And so, like, it's 80 yesterday and 50 today. So that would be Ohio. And that's the way it's been. And we've been having fire warning dangers in Ohio even a week after flooding, local flooding. So and I've never seen this in my life. So just a couple comments. Now, my wife is here, Pam. We're soon to celebrate 48 years. And if you weren't here yesterday, just kind of give you an idea of our relationship is I posted this on Facebook. There's things that she says to me that I've never said to her. In 48 years. And so I put it on Facebook, and I had three things. One, I think you have enough cheese on that. The next one was, I don't think you can get any more ice cream in that bowl. And then the one, golf is just a game. And I tell her, no, it's not a game. It's a metaphor of life, and we need to look at it. A couple things, too, is I noticed a couple things here. I mentioned them yesterday, but a couple that I forgot is I kept seeing these signs as we're driving across Canada, important intersection. And I'm like, why is it important? It looks like every other intersection. I don't know if it means, if it's a warning, just say, caution, watch out at the intersection or something like that. And then I saw one of the signs that's right out here on the fence. It says muster point. I assume that means is wait for the bus here or gather here for the bus. What's it mean? What's it mean? Oh, really? Okay. I didn't get that one at all then. I thought it meant gather here, and I thought, do you call the rapture the mustering or something like that? So, well, that joke fell flat. Somebody handed me this. He did this morning. Newsmax. It was you, wasn't it? Yes. Newsmax magazine. It's about the Shroud of Turin, the real face of Jesus. Now, so I sort of lean to the fact that the Shroud of Turin actually is an authentic historical artifact. I'm not dogmatic on it. My concern, though, is the cover of this. There's a video series out called The Chosen, and the guy that plays The Chosen, though, also played the active homosexual drug addict Lonnie Frisbee in the Jesus Revolution movie. And now you have this, and it looks like the guy. And so my concern is that people are getting a very confused image of Jesus, and we have very strict things about that. So I like the older movies, like the Charlton Heston type movies where Jesus was there, but you never saw his face. Because my concern with the Shroud of Turin is that it could become a religious fetish. And this happens. People start worshiping the thing. We know, for example, that the tabernacle was in Shiloh for almost 400 years. That's where, you can go there. You can see, and the fence posts are the exact measurements that they should be apart, where they put the tabernacle there and the ark, and that's where Samuel heard the voice of God. You can go to these places. It's incredible. But they had the brazen serpent there at Shiloh. And what did they do with that? They destroyed it because they were worshiping that thing and they were losing the message and the point. And I really appreciate Chris's talk again this morning. I sort of changed my approach to what I was going to talk about. I was going to talk more about the kingdom, but I just felt that I should talk more about the leading up to the establishment of the coming kingdom. And I saw a good book back there on the Millennial Kingdom, and you can get that and you can spend days studying about that. It will be a wonderful time that we will all participate in as the church. And so I really appreciated the way Chris approached it, because there is this replacement theology on the one end that we can reject. However, there is this other thing on the other end, that the church in Israel when they are the redeemed people of God, are completely and forever separate. And I don't accept that. And I'll sort of talk about that today. So I think that's, I wouldn't put it in the terms of a heresy. I put it in terms of you're going to find out that that idea that they're completely separate for all time is wrong. So that's just my view. And I appreciate Chris because I know his orientation, where he comes from, and he's having the conversation. And that's my point is we sometimes get very dogmatic about these future events. And things change. They're not set in stone. As I said a few times, we will sometimes only know looking back, oh yeah, that's what it was. So I have said this, and it's a joke or a humorous thing, observation, but in Revelation, it talks about, a period of time there will be 30 minutes of silence in heaven. And one of the things that might happen during that 30 minutes is all of the Bible prophecy teachers are updating all of their charts to reflect what actually happened. So, and so I always say, keep your charts in a very editable format. I appreciate Late Great Planet Earth. I read it when I was 15. But the world has changed since Hal Lindsey wrote that book. It's changed dramatically. So that book had a huge impact on a lot of people because it got them into the scripture. So we need to get back into the scripture. I'm going to talk a little bit about the millennial kingdom. And again, the verse that we talk about a lot at FBC. By the way, if you want to catch teachings, you can go to Fellowship Bible Chapel on YouTube, Real FBC on Rumble. We also have an app that you can download, Fellowship Bible Chapel. We're trying to roll out audio versions of what we put up, but we're a little tiny church, and we're all volunteers, so it's a little bit difficult to do that. So, and people are trying to help, and I'm trying to manage getting people to help that are volunteering, but it's a pretty difficult task. But anyway. We know at the time that people are going to be wise and understand. We're going to see an acceleration of things happening. We're going to see a convergence of all the Bible prophecies that are talked about. We're going to see there's a logistical aspect that has to be fulfilled. For example, the final Babylon. Is it in Iraq? If it's in Iraq, it's going to take a while to build, which means that if it's around at the end time, then maybe it's a little bit further off. However, maybe it's not. Maybe it's more of a system and a mindset that's going to manifest itself in some fashion in the end. And I think we see a lot of those things coming together, as I talked about yesterday. And then as we get closer, we will understand. This is the verse that we were told to look at the conference, from everlasting to everlasting. I'll talk about this in the next session, the session I do this afternoon. We'll just kind of have a little conversation about Jerusalem and Israel and some of the things that are going on there. There has been an explosion of what I think are prophetically significant events that at least show that the shadows, if you look at the horsemen as casting shadows back into our time, as we get closer to that time, the shadows will get sharper and sharper and easier to see and understand. And I think we're at that time. How far we are or not. But I'm going to suggest to you that God has always operated at appointed times. I found this at a website. I think it was actually put out by some Reformed people, Visual Theology. So you always have to understand that that's their orientation if you go to their website. But I thought this was a great representation of the feast that were given to Israel. I don't like the term the Feast of Israel. They're the feast of the Lord because they taught us about the Lord and his ministry and what the Messiah was going to do. So, then that gets into a big argument. Well, should we celebrate the feast or not? Listen, you decide what you need to do on that on your own. I'm saying if you go to a Passover Seder, I mentioned my friend Zola Levitt last night. He came to Columbus it was Good Friday, and we did a Messianic Passover Seder. And he got his priestly robes out and wore them and went through. And then he, shortly after that, it was the last one he ever did. And it was just a tremendous blessing. So we know that on the left side, you see the feast, the spring feast. We know that those feasts were fulfilled at Christ's first coming. And they were fulfilled in that last week. So my conclusion is, if that's the pattern, we're probably going to see the fall feast fulfilled in a very short period of time at the end of this last week of years that we're going to be in. So now, that's also to say, though, that there are patterns of the feast that may be partially fulfilled at different points. But we should focus on the end. So Chris talked about Pentecost. I preached on that just about a week ago. I agree with what he said. You know, this was the time that the tradition developed, that not only was Pentecost the spring feast to be celebrated, but it was the time that the Torah was given to Moses. And we know what happened. Moses was on the mountain, the people were watching, and Moses came down, and what had happened? There, the people, they had erected a golden calf that they were resurrecting it. By the way, this is Jebel al-Lawz in Saudi Arabia, modern day Saudi Arabia. The mountain range that it is in will be bisected, crossed by that new city that Mohammed bin Salman is building, Neom. Kind of think that's important. And now there are tours that are going to Jebel al-Lawz, and I happen to think that is the true Mount Sinai, but I will have friends who will disagree strongly with that, but it seems to fit. There's some things they found, like what appears to be the split rock of Horeb, where a lot of water came out of, that's there. And this has been inaccessible, though Mohammed bin Salman is opening it up. And at the same time, Saudi Arabia and now the United States government is pushing for Saudi Arabia and the U.S. to enter into some kind of a normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And it's one of the second most important goal that Netanyahu announced for his new administration back in December when he was sworn in as prime minister. This is very significant. I'll talk more about that in the next hour or in the next 45 minutes. That I have. So let me jump forward to this. So we get into this period of time where we will have the fall feast, and these are going to be fulfilled. Now, there are three of them. They happen in a very short period of time. You have trumpets, Day of Atonement, and tabernacles. And between trumpets and Day of Atonement, you have 10 days. The Feast of Trumpets is one of those, they don't really know the day that it starts on because they have to sight the new, see the new moon. And so they watch for that, and then they say this is the start of the days of trumpet. But the period of time, and again, when you put it in as, I think, prophetic context, you get this, maybe there's more going on there, that the trumpets, time of trumpets to Day of Atonement is 10 days. And it's referred to as the days of awe. And I'll explain a little bit more what I want to say about that. I'm also going to talk about this. I was there. I'm pretty sure that's the day I was talking to Chris, bugging him, I guess, talking about things. We were at the Pool of Siloam. This is a very important place. This has not been there that long. So this is about the size of 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. 20 years ago, it wasn't really, they knew it existed because of Scripture, but they didn't really know where it was. It's very important, I think, as we lead up to the start, this millennial kingdom that's coming, the discovery of this road in the way that it's being presented by the people in charge at the City of David Foundation has tremendous implications for the church in Israel. I'll finish up with that, but they present this as this is this pilgrimage road that goes from the Pool of Siloam to the Temple Mount that really has not been used for almost 2,000 years. Now is being opened up. They have about 100 yards. When I was there in December, they had about 100 yards, 100 meters to go to uncover it so that it could be used all the way from the Pool of Siloam to the Temple Mountain. Believe me, it's up. You'll see some pictures in just a moment. As I was walking around Israel one night, we went to dinner down in Jerusalem, and the guys I was with who are much younger and don't have artificial joints like I do, they said, hey, let's walk down by the City of David. So I'm a stupid guy, so I went along, 'cause I'm a guy. And as I was walking around Jerusalem, I'm looking at my app for directions, and they said, well, we get all the way down there, and it's down. I'm talking like a 600-foot elevation change. It's like a 60-story building from where we were down there. And they said, well, okay, we'll just walk up to the Jaffa Gate and catch a cab back to the hotel. So I'm looking at my app, and they're like, it's 600 feet up. It's like a 60-story building. I just had dinner, I'm sweating, and I'm a sweater. I'm sweating like crazy. And I'm looking at my app, and then another day I was in the old city of Jerusalem by the Menorah Square there, and I was going over to have dinner with some friends, some journalist friends. And I'm looking at my app, and everywhere I went in Jerusalem, it says, give me the route, and it said mostly flat. And I'm thinking, so Google's running AI, and they're telling me it's mostly flat? What I think they meant was it's mostly smooth. You don't have to climb up a wall or a cliff. You have to climb up stairways, and the rest is uphill. It seems like every time you walk down, you got to walk back up, right? It just sort of evens out that way. But this Pool of Siloam is down in the City of David. It's being uncovered. When we were there, there was I'll show you some pictures in a moment. What's being happened is why is this happening now? Does this have any significance? And the more I've thought about it, I've talked about it with Tom Hughes on Hope for Our Times, and he and I are, I think, in perfect agreement on this. This is very important from a prophetic standpoint about what may be accomplished with this. So here's a sort of a artist rendering, a video of the Pool of Siloam, and you can see there the steps coming out in the distance there to the left now. That's the beginning of the pilgrimage road. In the feast, there were 4 feasts that they had to, the males were supposed to go to Jerusalem. And when they went to Jerusalem at the time of Jesus, they went here. And they walked this road up to the Temple Mount. They went to the Pool of Siloam because it was a mikvah. And in that mikvah, they would ritually bathe themselves. Then they would walk up to the temple. In fact, in the road, as they've excavated it, they have found at least one gold bead that came from, they were sure that it fell off the robe of the high priest and rolled down into the drainage channel underneath the road. They have it. They have found, well, I'll show you that in just a moment. So this is a picture taken about 100 years ago of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. And this is looking from the north towards the south, and south of the Temple Mount, just to the left there, is the area of City of David. And you can see that it's just essentially a covered over field. So 100 years ago, even up into the 2000s, there wasn't much there to show. In 2019, Barry Weiss, who's a pretty good author, I don't agree with her personal lifestyle or anything. She's Jewish. She's married to a woman. But she writes some very good things. She was fired by the New York Times. That's sort of like a good thing, right? But when she was still at the New York Times in 2019, she wrote this wonderful series of articles about the city of David in the New York Times. So I'm just telling you and it's like, what does this mean for the future of Jerusalem was her question. Because she's Jewish, and she, even as secular as she might be, she understands that something is going on. When you read articles by an author that I really respect a lot, there are a couple of them, Melanie Phillips and Caroline Glick. Caroline will write about something is going on. And now she's a committed Zionist, and she will tell you this is the story of Jesus. You guys can mess around with that if you want. That's not for us. And I would always say, it's not for you yet. Well, it really is, but there's this coming time that Chris was talking about. And can an archaeological dig change the future of Jerusalem? You can look that up on the New York Times website. Here's one of the archaeologists. And so you can see in the upper right-hand corner the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on the south end of the Temple Mount. You can see the southern wall. Below that are the steps, that there is no doubt that Jesus walked on these steps. So the issue is, if he walked on those steps, did he walk on this road? And the answer was, well, we know in John chapter 9, this story about the pool of Siloam, the blind guy, he made mud, put it on his eyes, and told to go wash in the pool of Siloam. Then there was a big controversy about Jesus. And a lot of times those controversies about Jesus, the way the scripture written is very interesting. They will sometimes put in the English translation, are you the one? And he will answer, I am. And then they will put in italics, the translators will put in some words that aren't really in the original text because they're trying to help you understand what's there. But the answer of Jesus and what's in the text, go look at all the I am phrases, ego ami, in the Greek. You can go to a Blue Letter Bible and you can look them up. Jesus answers, I am. Now, what does that have significance? Jesus made these incredible claims about himself, and they were always backed up. And we see all of these things. We see a lot of things. This is a bulla, Naten Melech Eved Hamelech. It's to Nathan Melech, the king's servant. It appears in 2 Kings. This is a little seal. The Hebrew writing on there has been translated like this. And they found this down in the city of David in what they call the parking lot excavation area. This used to be a parking lot. Now they've excavated down. How steep it is, and this is the area where David had his palace and that type of thing. It's really mind-blowing. And it's hard to understand how steep everything is down in there. But this was the mountain where God chose to interact with people. This is where Abram, the mountain up there just past where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is, that's where Abram offered Isaac. And there's no doubt about this. It's where the temples stood, the first and second temples, and it's where another temple is going to stand too. And are there two temples coming, or are there one? I think there's one that will be renovated by the Messiah. That's how I think it's going to happen. But here's a guy. So down in that mess, they found this little tiny thing. They are very meticulous the way they go about looking at these things. This is a picture of what the pilgrimage road looks like today, as it's been. This was back in 2019, and more of it has been opened up. And the reason is because it's in an area in Jerusalem that's now underneath the village. So this is what this is an aerial view from, I think, 1934 of what Jerusalem looked like. You can see the old city there, the Temple Mount, the old city to the left and to the north. But to the south, down here at the bottom, you see that it just looks like fields. Now, it's been built up, so when they come in there to open this pilgrimage road, they've got to put in a steel superstructure because there's a village above it now. And it's very controversial, but the City of David Foundation has been getting donations, and they've been buying up the land. And when I was there, the Pool of Siloam was, you could see a little bit of it. Now it's largely been uncovered just in 3 months. That's important. I'll explain why in a minute because I don't have much time left. So again, here's the picture. You see the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock to the right, and down to the south a little bit is the that Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque, southern steps, and then down into the City of David. And you can see back in 1934, this is another picture, I think, from 1920. It just wasn't nothing there. You know, you got to remember the context of all of this is that the Jews were out of the land largely for a very long time. Many, many generations. As Caroline Glick says in some of her articles, we're at a very unique time because there have been 2 periods of time prior to now where the Jews really controlled things for a period of 70 years. Just last week, they celebrated the 75th anniversary of the rebirth of the nation of Israel. Talk a little bit more about that this afternoon. This is a picture from 2016 of that area. So you can see it went from this to this over a 75-year period or so. And there's an Arab village there. So they have to go down and build. And you can see how steep it is that they've built. And yes, I do fit through that. I had a friend we went to Israel with him once. He was a very large man, much bigger than I am. I know that you're trying to wrap your head around that. Carl Kirby asked him about that because his dad was a professional wrestler. But when we were on the plane, the flight attendant, he was standing in the aisle, and she came up to him and she said, "Sir, would you please turn sideways so I could get by you?" And he looked down and he said, "Honey, there is no sideways with me." And in that, he spoke the truth. So we know the story about Jesus and the Pool of Siloam. And so what they've done now is they're uncovering this road. This is a graphic on the left from the City of David Foundation. You can see the Pool of Siloam, and then sort of highlighted in yellow, you see the processional road all the way to the Temple Mount. Every Jew who came on a pilgrimage in Jerusalem would go to the Pool of Siloam and walk that road. Several times a year. At Passover, I did a talk on Jesus' triumphal entry. There were probably 1 million people in Jerusalem in that day. Put that into context. Rome, the capital city of the world empire, had about 1 million people. So at this feast where people came to learn about God and celebrate the relationship and learn about the coming Messiah, there were 1 million people there. And they were learning in the place. And the Zionists that I've met in Israel, the conservative Orthodox, not ultra-Orthodox, but Orthodox Jews, they know this place is significant. Every place is significant. I was with a couple at Shabbat. They moved to Bethel from New York when they made Aliyah. They came from largely secular, a Jewish home. They got religion, moved to Israel, and said, "We want to live in Bethel," because of what happened in Bethel. Now they live in Efrat and they work with Hebron because they want to be associated with that, because this is their land. And the scandal, in my opinion, of tours to Israel, and I understand the difficulty, is that most tours circle Judea and Samaria. They go up the coast, they go up to the Golan, they come down through the Jordan Valley, and they come up to Jerusalem. But the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria is largely left unvisited by most tours. I would pray that we can change that because it's significant for them. We were in Shechem, Pam will remember, in Nablus. Every square you drive through in Shechem, or in Nablus going to the Tel at Shechem, the place where the city was in biblical times, was a terrorist, a square to honor a terrorist who had done a bombing and killing of Jews in Israel. Every single one of them. They had pictures of them smiling and everything, usually taken or drawn from a picture taken the morning that they went to do their terrorist act. Everywhere you went, it's like this. It's like this in Hebron as well. I don't think we really understand this, but here on the right, this is a picture of the pilgrimage road that is opening up. As I said, 100 meters to go. And the goal is that because of the Pool of Siloam and its connection to Jesus, that Christians and Jews will come at this time to walk the road together. This is what they say. We want millions of people to walk this road, Jews and Christians. I get chills when I hear people say something like that because I understand the biblical context of all of this. So let me just and this is what the road would have looked like back at the time of when it was the pilgrimage road. There were shops, stores, and things along it. You can see those in some of the excavations. So it was open to the sky then. Now it's not open to the sky because it's under a village. But there would be places like the one to the right. You would see these places where people would stand and speak to the pilgrims that were going by. So is this a place where Jesus stood and spoke? It could be. Let me make a few more comments to set the context of this. Matthew chapter 24, Jesus gives us a marker. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, flee to the mountains and pray that your flight not be on Shabbat or when you're pregnant. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's just for the Jews. We don't have to worry. Nobody else has to think about that. I think it's a prophecy about the place, because pray that your flight not be on Shabbat. If the Jews aren't in control of Jerusalem, that is meaningless. But it's talking about a future time where the Jews will be in control of Jerusalem. And by the way, go try to catch a bus in Jerusalem on Shabbat. They don't run. It has a literal meaning that is, and I just don't think we've looked at it deeply enough. So it's going to be a Jewish city. Paul talks about it in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Daniel chapter 9, I mentioned this briefly. Daniel's reading the scroll of Jeremiah when he's in Babylon, and it says you're going to be there for 70 years. And Daniel's like, we could go home, but his immediate thing was, we need to repent as a nation because we violated God's law. Because why were they sent there for 70 years? Because they had violated the Sabbath year admonition that to let the land lay rest every seventh year. And how many times do you think they've done that? Well, let's see. They're punished for 70 years, and they're not allowed to be in the land. So the land gets its 70 years. The ledger gets evened up. But now they were out of the land for 2,000 years. Does that have any significance? And Daniel was talking about, we can go back, but then the angel comes and says, oh, wait, Daniel, it's 77s that you're going to be out of the land. And we know from his other prophecies that there's a series of empires, Gentile empires, both happening then and prophetic as well. And Daniel gets all of this information, and then people know, as I mentioned in one of my talks, they know this is the time that the Messiah is coming because the prophecies of Daniel are coming to an end. And we can read about that in Daniel chapter 11 and 12. In Deuteronomy 32, it talks about the fact that because of their offense, they're going to be out of the land. 36, I think, is the verse. Chris mentioned Romans chapter 11. One part of Romans 11 that I've wrestled with myself is that the believers that Paul's talking about, you people in the church, you're grafted into the olive tree. You're a wild olive branch. You become part of the olive tree, but the natural branches are taken out but they're set aside for a while, but they get grafted in at the end, back in. And it doesn't mean that we're ripped out so they can be grafted back in again. I don't think that's what happens. I think there's this concept we need to talk about and look at about the redeemed people of God, the redeemed remnant of God going forward. I agree that this Israel thing is incredibly significant and important. So now I want to talk briefly about Hosea 5 and 6 to say we have the prophecies of Daniel, where Daniel talked about, the 70 weeks, and it gave them timing for the first coming of Messiah. Is there a passage that may give us a time marker indication that the second coming of the Messiah is coming? The first coming of Messiah had plenty of prophecies, so that when it started to unfold, people would be able to say, yeah, this is that which was prophesied. And are we at the time where there's another time marker that sort of indicates that we are at a time when we can have a deeper understanding of when prophecies begin to fulfill? Now, I'm not married to this. I'm not date setting or anything like that. I'm suggesting to you that this may be significant, a passage in Hosea chapter 5, starting in verse 15 and then continuing to the next chapter. Of course, there were no chapter divisions when the scripture was written. Hosea chapter 5, verse 15. And there's a great teaching in Footsteps of the Messiah by Arnold Fruchtenbaum on this. I think it's important. I will return again to my place till they acknowledge their offense. And so it says, till they acknowledge their offense, I'm going to return to my place. What did we just hear Chris say so eloquently about the Mount of Olives and the ascension of Jesus? At the ascension of Jesus, did Jesus go back someplace? And is he coming back from that place? How long was he going to be away from that place? He says, I will return again to my place till they acknowledge their offense. Chris mentioned it in his talk. I thought, he's hacked my presentation. Even though he recorded it in advance, and I was working on this, finishing it up this morning. How did he do that? Because when the body is studying the same thing, there's going to be tremendous unity on these things. And I'm just saying there's going to be unity on things like this as I think they unfold. And there's going to be people from all different perspectives in eschatology, on timing of the rapture and that sort of thing. There's going to be a tremendous unity in the body on if we let the understanding flow. That's my understanding. So don't want to be dogmatic, don't want to date set or anything. But it says here that they will acknowledge my offense. So we know that the offense of not keeping the Sabbath year resulted in them being removed from the land for 70 years. Then the question is, what offense did they commit that would cause them to be out of the land for 2,000 years? Just go read the story of the crucifixion and trial of Jesus. We just preached on it at Fellowship Bible Chapel after the triumphant entry. His blood be on us and on our children. That was a marker that was done largely by the Jewish nation at the time. Is it possible that if not recognizing the Shabbat year 70 times resulted in removal from the land, what kind of offense is it to the Lord when you don't acknowledge the Messiah who's standing right there in your presence? It could last 2,000 years. And then it says, they will seek my face in their affliction. They will earnestly seek me. And we know that there is, as much as we love Israel, we have to acknowledge there is a time of testing and trial coming. I'll talk about that some this afternoon. What's going on is, it's mind-blowing all over the world from a prophetic perspective, in my opinion. Then they will seek my face. In their affliction, they will earnestly seek me. So let me just put it in context. So we know they're out of the land. Titus comes in, destroys the city utterly in 70 AD. We know that 62 years later, there was another Roman destruction of Jerusalem. And this one, they wiped it out. They renamed it. They plowed it under. And you can see the remnants of that from some of the archaeology. When we talk about the menorah that they have in the Old City right now, it comes from a representation what's in the Arch of Titus that you can see near the Colosseum in Rome. Yes, thank you. I've been there, so. But then it says this, I will return again to my place. Verse 1 of Hosea 6. Come, let us return to the Lord. For he has torn, but he will heal us. He has stricken, but he will bind us up. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will raise us up that we may live in his sight. Now, there's a teaching called Chileanism that sort of takes the 6 days of creation and the millennium turns it into 7 days, 6,000 years, and 1,000 years. I know the 1,000 years works. It's in Scripture. It's easy to find out. The 6 day thing is a little bit murky because of how history and archaeology is working. But in Hosea, we have a 2 day, 1 day. It's crystal clear. It's right there in the Scripture. And so I'm going to suggest to you, and we know that this happens when Israel is back in the land. The problem with teachings on this is, you know that chart I showed you where all the scriptures are interconnected? It's impossible to take a slice of it out without referring to everything else. But Ezekiel 36, one of my favorite passages, it talks about the future restoration of Israel. It says they're going to come back to the land. The land's going to be restored. We know, like, from people, Mark Twain, back in the 1800s, went to Israel, and they said, this thing is a wasteland. There's nobody here. There were a couple Jewish yeshivas and synagogues there, and the Jews always had a presence in the land, but there really wasn't a presence of much of anybody. It was Tel Aviv was swamps. Go look at the pictures of Tel Aviv in 1909 when they founded the city. It's sand dunes. Now you have a city that looks like a miniature New York. All happened in our lifetimes. And it's growing like you wouldn't believe. When I was in Israel, on my way over to the Temple Mount one day, I counted the giant construction cranes in Jerusalem in just one quarter. I had like 35 giant construction cranes. It looked like Dallas in the 1980s. They used to say the state bird of Texas was the giant construction crane. This is happening in Jerusalem right now, but in Ezekiel chapter 36, it says, listen, I sent you into the nations, and you played the harlot there. You defiled my name among the Gentiles. But I am going to bring you back. And I'm not going to bring you back because you deserve it. Think of this in terms of Christian theology. Does the Lord save us because we deserve it? We're saved because of the mercy and grace of the Lord. But he says to you, Jewish people, I will bring you back. I will restore you for my name's sake, because I promised that this was happen. I have a covenant. It's going to happen. And when you're back, they're gathered in unbelief. Have they been gathered in unbelief? Yep. Go to the gay pride parade in Tel Aviv, who touts itself as one of the most LGBTQ friendly cities on the planet. It's an abomination. But the Lord brought them back because his holy name was at stake. And he promised to restore them. We ought to take comfort from that because the Lord promised to protect us too when we are brought into this believing remnant. But he says, when you're back, I will give you a heart of flesh. So let me suggest this. I believe that the Lord returns. This is John Howard's little timeline. The Lord returns on the Day of Atonement. And let me just ask you, even among nominally Jewish people, when would they be more likely to acknowledge their offenses against the Lord, the Day of Atonement. And I believe what happens, or the way I read Hosea 5 and 6 is, the Lord will only return when they call for him to come rescue them. There's a precursor to that. It's their salvation. So listen, let me finish with this. So this pilgrimage road, on the pilgrimage road that will soon open, maybe this year, to pilgrims from all religions to walk up to the Temple Mount, what did the Jews do when they were on that road? They sang what are known as the Psalms of Ascent. And it's interesting that on the triumphal entry of Jesus, they were singing some of these psalms about the coming king. But the title of my sermon when I did that a few months ago was, they were singing the right thing but the wrong time. But think about it. Let me pull up one of these quickly. Here's one of the Psalms of Ascent. I'll run through a couple of them very, very quickly. In my distress, I cried to the Lord, and he heard me. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue. And so the goal of the people in this City of David Foundation is, we want the Jews to come and do this pilgrimage from the mikveh, the pool of Siloam, to the Temple Mount. Now, they're talking about building a temple too. And we know that's coming, and we know that it's going to be an abomination, and there's an abomination of desolation associated with. But what I'm saying is, these Psalms of Ascent are there to prepare the people's hearts for the decision that has to be made to return to the Lord. That's Psalm 120. There's Psalms 120 to 134. 121, we know these. I will lift my eyes to the hills from whence comes my help. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. My suggestion to you is that when Christians go to this road and make the pilgrimage, they should be singing and reciting the Psalms of Ascent as well, because this, I call it practice for the beginning of the millennium, because the Lord's coming back there to that mount, to Mount of Olives, and then to the Temple Mount to rule and reign. And Chris was 100%, 198% correct when he said the Ark of the Covenant was the mercy seat, but it was also the throne. And I believe the ark an ark will be there in the temple during the millennium, and it will be the throne from which the Messiah will rule and reign. What was sprinkled as blood, with blood as a shadow, will have the literal flesh and blood Messiah Jesus Christ sitting there ruling and reigning. I'm suggesting to you that this is happening because it's time. And we need to be ready. Can I just take 2 minutes for sorry, Carl. As we were standing in this road near here, there's flagstones. It's a place where it's flat, but they were broken. And the guide said, why were they broken? In 70 AD, over in the corner, there's a little glass dome, and underneath it is a coin. He said, in that channel, we found another coin. These were coins minted by the rebels. No cashless society in Jerusalem in those days. As Rome was trying to get them. And the last Jews, they were hiding in the drainage channel under the road. And they found this coin there. The guy said, a couple years ago, my father, who was shuttled through 11 concentration camps during World War II and survived and came here, we stood here. should see me in a Hallmark movie. So my father came here with me. He now lives in Jerusalem. He wanted to go down in the drainage channel because he wanted to feel the oppression that the Jews hiding out there felt, to relate to his feelings during the Holocaust. But he said to his son, the guide, but today, you and I can stand here together in Jerusalem, our land. But he said, this was where Jerusalem ended in 70 AD. But I think it's where the real beginning of the restoration of Israel and Jerusalem in the Temple Mount is going to begin. And we will get to go there and walk that road soon in large numbers. We need to be prepared. God has prepared. He's put all these things in place, and he's bringing them to the front, to our mind, at a particular time. And I certainly believe we live at that time. So if you go 2,000 years, 2 days from the ascension of Jesus, when they're out of the land, but now they're back, that was around 30 to 32 AD. So if this Day of Atonement happens in that time, it may be a time marker that, you really should pay attention to what's going on, because this may be it. Now, we could be wrong. I don't agree. I've seen statements attributed to Billy Graham. Jesus might not come back for 200 or 300 years. Bless his heart, I just don't think that that's a good statement to make at this time. So look, be ready. Get ready. Share the message with people. Use the message of the apocalypse, the coming revealing of Jesus Christ, to share the gospel with people, because it's really real and it's happening. God bless.